Hi everyone, and welcome to the next chapter from Nimzowicz's My System. This time we'll look at the ideas of overprotection and weak pawns. Overprotection is a word that is often banded around in chess circles, and it was one of Nimzowicz's own conceptions, although it's not given as much importance as some of his other positional explorations. As the name implies, overprotection involves the systematic overprotecting of strategical strongpoints in our position. We will also look at ways to get rid of weak pawns and weak squares. We touched on overprotection when we were discussing prophylaxis and the center. One of the important things to bear in mind is that the contact between the strong point and the overprotecting pieces must work to the advantage of both parties. It works to the advantage of the point itself in that it brings it to a higher degree of safety, purely because it is a focal point of the pieces involved, and therefore it has a higher resilience against any enemy attacks. For the pieces involved in the overprotection, they gain because the point acts for them like a source of energy from which they can continually draw strength. Overprotection is a maneuver that is closely linked to positional play, and it also has obvious practical advantages in that it implies harmony and piece cooperation. It featured in the elements that we explored in the first half of the book, and also in the chapter on pawn chains in various different ways. It's something that is always worth bearing in mind, to identify strategically important points and aim our pieces towards them together. We can look at a couple of examples now from Nimzowitsch himself that showcase the merits of overprotection. The first was played against Rubinstein in Carlsbad in 1911. Nimzowitsch had white and opened with e4. Rubinstein played the French, and we saw the mainline advance variation after d4, d5 and e5. So now the main line, c5, c3, knight c6, knight f3, queen b6. So black's just putting pressure on d4. Bishop d3, c takes d4, c takes d4, and bishop d7, and not of course knight takes d4, because white can exchange, play bishop b5 check, winning the queen's beginner's trap. So bishop d7, now bishop e2, just protects the pawn, knight g7, b3, knight f5, bishop b2, so there's extra defense for d4, and now bishop b4 check. And king f1 is forced. If he blocks with a piece, then d4 is falling, because it interrupts the queen's defense. So king f1 is a square. And so now h5 secures the knight on this nice square f5, and white shouldn't... oh, sorry, no. Yeah, there's some lines when the bishop is on d3, and it's not a good idea to exchange, but obviously that doesn't apply in this case. So g3, rook c8, king g2, g6, h3, getting ready to kick the knight. So bishop e7 is to play knight h4 check if g4 is played. So now queen d2, a5, rook c1, bishop f8, and now queen d1, because there was a threat of bishop h6. And yeah, so queen d1. So bishop h6 anyway, attacking the rook, so rook c3. Castles g4, knight fe7, now knight a3. And the reasons for delaying the development of this knight become clear, because it's going to be given the honourable role of overprotecting d4, along with the other pieces after knight b4, now knight c2. So now came some exchanges, rook c3, bishop c3, knight c2, queen c2, rook c8, queen b2, which is again protecting d4. And so white is now safe in the knowledge that his weakness will not fall. So bishop b5, black goes about solving his own positional problems. He's trading off this bishop, which is often bad in many lines over the French, and therefore exchanging it's usually a good idea. Bishop takes b5, queen takes b5, and bishop d2. So now the pressure is gone on d4. White can start making some threats, and suddenly the overprotecting pieces start to show their strengths. So So bishop f8, now rook c1, h takes g, h takes g, rook c6, now queen a3. It's a surprising move because it's you know, setting up some potentially nasty tactics with the bishop eyeing the queen. And you know, we saw a beginner's trap in the opening. This is more of a master's trap. Rubinstein played at rook takes c1. If he played, for example, knight f5, if black allows it, rook c6 is possible. And after bishop takes a3, rook c8, king g7. This is given in the book, although h7 might be better. And now g takes f5, and white has a very strong attack here. And this variation gives an excellent demonstration of the inattention of the overprotecting pieces and how they can suddenly spring to life. So rook takes c1 was played instead, so queen takes c1. And from here, white had a better game, and I don't think he won, but it was a very comfortable game. He's got the c-file, his pieces are slightly better, and he almost won the endgame, in fact, but he made a small mistake that gave Rubinstein the draw. So we can go next to a game that Nimzowitsch played against Spielmann in Stockholm in 1920. So Nimzowitsch had white again, and we saw another French defense. Advanced variation, same opening as before, but now bishop e2. Instead, cd, cd, and knight h6, and knight c3. b3, as in the previous example, is also possible. So knight f5, attacking d4. Knight a4, queen a5 check, bishop d2, bishop b4, now bishop c3. And bishop d7 from Spielmann. Stronger in Nimzowicz's view was bishop takes c3, knight takes c3, queen b4, attacking b2 as well. Bishop b5, castles, bishop takes c6, queen takes b2, knight a4, queen b4 check, queen d2, and white can enjoy the use of this c5 square, but black has an extra pawn, so it's nice imbalance, and Nimzowitsch felt this was a better way to play it. So bishop d7 anyway was in the game. So a3, bishop takes c3, knight takes c3, and h5. Castles, rook c8, queen d2, now queen d8 in order to play g5 and g4 to win d4. So h3, and this is going to allow g5 to be met with g4. So knight a5. So yeah, if g5, then g4, hg, hg, knight h4, rook h4, king g2, and rook h1 next, with advantage to white. So knight a5, rook a d1, queen b6, rook fe1, and you know, with this move, if we take a look at the position, it should be clear that d4 and also e5 are overprotected by the white pieces, and this approach will give white great flexibility and allow him to handle any complications that arise later in the game almost automatically. So knight c4, bishop takes c4, rook takes c4, knight e2, bishop a4, rook c1, bishop b3, rook takes c4, bishop takes c4, knight g3, knight e7. And white stands with a slight edge and went on to win the game in 40 further moves. So in this example we saw the overprotection of the base of the pawn chain, which is a common motif. Of course, it's often necessary to protect other points, for example in the center of the board, which is what we'll look at next. We've already discussed at length the great importance of the center as a general rule in chess. This is all the more important against hypermodern play, when our opponent doesn't occupy the center with pawns immediately, but prefers to control it with pieces, often fianchettoed bishops. To illustrate this point, Nimzowitsch gave a game of Retties, played against Yates in New York in 1924. Retty with white opened with knight f3, the Retty opening, so no surprise there. Play continued at d5, c4, e6, g3, knight f6, bishop g2, bishop at d6, b3, and now black castle, which is a bit premature. If white is allowing it, then black should take the center immediately with knight d7 and e5 in one move. So castles, rook e8, bishop b2, knight bd7, and d3. Some players have a tendency to play this way. Obviously d4 is possible instead here. It's going to block the bishop, but it's going to clamp down on e5, so it's desirable in some ways as well. So c6, knight bd2, and now e5, which is only possible because white has played this d3 instead of d4. So now there's little doubt that black has won the opening battle. C takes d5, c takes d5, rook c1, knight f8, rook c2, bishop d7, and now queen a1, attacking e5. So knight g6, now rook fc1. And Retty is no amateur, so what's he up to here with his queen on a1? And the plan is to play d4 in order to undermine the black center, and perhaps this is why he's delayed playing it in the opening. And if d4 is answered by e4, then white wants to be able to play knight e5, so black needs to overprotect this e5 point before he pushes on d4. So the best move here in Nimzowicz's view is b5 for black, to try and take control of the queen side, because the queen is somewhat misplaced on a1. If now knight f1 for example and queen b8 is one way to overprotect e5, which is what black should be able to do, should want to do in order to retain his superior position in the center. So knight e3, and now a5 with a4 to come next, and a better game for black. So that's how the center should be overprotected against hypermodern play, with its maneuvers like queen b8 and making absolutely sure that our strong pawns are overprotected. So we can have a look at a full game that features similar play from Nimzowitsch himself. If we go here, and in fact we've seen this game already in the earlier chapter on the passed pawn, but it's also relevant to overprotection. It's the game that Nimzowitsch played against von Freyman in Vilnius in 1912. Nimzowitsch had white and he opened with e4, after which came e6, another French defense, advanced variation when early c takes d4, so knight d4, knight c6, knight takes, b takes, bishop d3, queen c7, bishop f4, and g5, which can't be a sound move, but it leads to an interesting position. Bishop g3, bishop e7. We can see black's idea. So queen e2 just to defend e5, knight e7, castles, now h5, h3, because h4 was threatened, and knight f5, and now bishop h2, which is the correct move. Playing instead bishop takes, and after e takes, hoping for e6, trying to gain a tempo on the queen and wreck black's position a little bit. This runs into problems after f4. E takes f7, king takes f7, and all white has succeeded in doing is trapping his bishop out of the game. So bishop h2, now g4 is the logical continuation of black's attacking plan. And he did have some very nice ideas in mind here, some of which we'll see in a moment, as he was expecting h takes g4 here, but Nimzowitsch played the overprotecting move rook e1 instead, and by strengthening the center, white makes himself much stronger against flank attacks as well. Had he played instead hg4 after and after hg, queen takes g4, this is the point black's offering this pawn, Now black can really go for the throat with the rook takes h2, king takes h2, bishop takes c5 check. And bishop takes b2 is coming next, and getting the material back with a much better position. So of course Nimzowitsch saw that coming and didn't accept the pawn. So rook e1. So king f8, and now knight c3. This is the beginning of a blockading maneuver. So queen e7, now bishop f5, e takes f5, queen e3, rook h6, knight e2, c5, and knight f4. And now white can look forward to a very nice game. This f4 knight is superb, and the bishop pair are going to be largely ineffective here. Not only that, but black's position is a little congested, and there's not much piece harmony. White went on to win after a considerable fight, but the point as far as we're concerned is the importance of white's overprotection in the center. Okay, so this is the next position we'll have a look at regarding overprotection. Nimzowitsch had black here, so we'll flip the board over. And he reached this playing a consultation game against 3 Swedish amateurs. So from this position, how should black proceed? If you'd like to figure it out, then stop the video here. Okay, so if we take a look at the position, it's clear that this d5 knight is a superb piece and the pride of the black position, but it's not so easy to find a plan for black, and white is threatening to take the initiative with something like queen d2 and rerouting his knight to c5, something like that. It's not a hugely dangerous plan, but it's better than any that black has immediately. Nimzowitsch reveals his thought process during the game, which led to a hidden maneuver that was very instructive. His thinking can be listed in bullet points. First of all, the knight d5 is strong, as we've established. Secondly, if the knight is strong, then the overprotecting pieces, the queen and the rook, are also strong. However, the rook also has commitments to defending the king, because there's some pressure here on the c file, rook c1 and so on could be coming. And so this is problematic, and this influences and reduces the rook's strength in the center. Therefore, correct play involves bringing the other rook to d8 and bringing the rook that's there now to c8, from where it can adequately defend the king from any c-file pressure. So with this in mind, black plays king b8, and play continued queen d2, rook c8, bishop e7, sorry, knight e1, bishop e7, knight d3, and now rook h d8. And now the d8 rook is a genuinely strong and flexible central piece, and black's position is much improved. And this was in fact one of Nimzowicz's favorite games, so we may as well see it all the way through. There are some great illustrations of the power of overprotection within it as well. So next came queen c2 and now f5. After consolidating his center and his position as a whole, black now goes on the attack. And this isn't so easy because there are no clear objects of attack, and white obviously has attacking chances as well here on the queen side. So rook c1 is a tempting and kind of positionally minded move. This kind of move you can play automatically without looking for better ones, but in fact b4 is stronger here because it gives white the option of knight c5, and if black exchanges with bishop takes c5, then b takes c5, and this b file is going to be very strong. Black can answer with b6, but knight c5 can still be played here. Best play goes sorry, not b takes c5, it goes bishop takes c5, b takes c5 and c6. If black is crazy enough to play b takes c5, then b takes c5 check, and black should give back the piece immediately with knight b6, but let's say he gets greedy, plays king a8, there's all kinds of nastiness coming his way. c6 first of all, and after queen e8, rook a4. It's threatening rook takes a7 and queen a4, which is going to be mate. So knight b6 and now d5. Powerful moves, unleashing the bishop. So rook takes d5, now rook takes a7 is possible. King a7, queen a4 check, king b8, bishop takes b6, c takes b6, rook b6 check, king c7, rook b7 check, king d8, c7 with check from the queen. Sorry, not with check from the queen, with check from the pawn. Rook takes c7, this is the point, rook b8 check, rook c8, rook c8, king c8, queen takes e8, and white wins. So it's very powerful combination play. And it should be noted that in these lines, if black doesn't accept the sacrifice, his central position is so good that he has no fear when it comes to opening the position, because he's in control of it, and therefore he can avoid any possible combinations that his opponent attempts. Okay, so we can get back to the game continuation. Rook c1 instead of b4. So now g5, knight c5, bishop takes c5, rook takes c5, rook g8. Black's intentions are clear. So queen e2, and now h5 for a nice play. Bishop d2. If queen takes h5, then g4 and rook h8 next is going to trap the queen, as the other rook can move to g8 afterwards. So bishop d2, now h4, a4. We've got classic opposite castling scenario with pawn storms going on. g4, a5, a6. Just slowing white down. After b4 comes c6. It's very nice prophylactic play. Now there's absolutely no way for white to continue his attack. Although he's provoked these weaknesses, they're not a concern at all. And so suddenly the three Swedish amateurs are faced with a strategically problematic position. This knight is really great, whereas the bishop is useless, and white is faced with a pawn storm on his king, and subsequent exposure of the weakening pawn moves he's played. So rook b1, queen f7 is to play f4, rook b3, f4, queen e4, f3. Yeah, and rook c1 now. If he plays g takes f3, then g takes f3, king f1, rook g1 check, king g1, queen g7 check, forcing bishop g5 to avoid mate, queen g5, king f1, queen g2 check, king e1, queen g1 check, king d2, queen takes f2, and black's winning it easily. So rook c1 is better. So f takes g2, king takes g2, rook c f8, immediately attacking f2. And the flexibility and fluidity of the rooks is a testament to overprotection, as Nimzowitsch saw it. So rook f1, now g3, and this is very, very powerful attack. hg3, hg3, and f4 was played now. If rook takes g3 now, rook takes g3, and the king is going to be badly exposed after king takes g3. So h takes g3, now f4. Knight e7 is rerouting the knight to an equally powerful square, f5. So bishop e1 to try and round up this pawn. If rook takes g3, now knight f5, rook g5 is best, but then comes the rook g5, f takes g5, and knight h4 checks, winning the exchange and the game. So bishop e1, now knight f5, rook h1, rook g4, bishop takes g3, now queen g6, and queen e1. The Swedish amateurs figure that they can take the pawn and try and defend with this pin, but now their advancing of the pawns to the fourth rank is violently refuted. Knight takes g3, rook takes g3, rook f takes f4, rook h3, rook takes d4. They're just dropping like ripe apples. Queen f2, rook takes g3, rook takes g3, queen e4 check, king h2, queen takes e5, king g2, queen d5 check. So the queen moves to this powerful outpost square on d5, and here the Swedes resigned because Nimzowitsch is not only 2 pawns up, but he's also completely dominating the position. So it's a very instructive game, very well played by Nimzowitsch. And he ends that section by stressing again that we must only overprotect strategically valuable points and not weaknesses such as pawns or a weak-looking king side or something like that. He also emphasized this by referring to the act of blockading as not being, not of blockading, of overprotecting, as not being an act of Christian charity, because the pieces doing the overprotecting are doing so because they expect strategic advantages to flow from it. There are some exceptions to the rule. For example, when we overprotect a weak pawn at the base of the chain because it's protecting a strong strategical point. For example, the e5 pawn in the French defense for white is a strong point, so we might overprotect d4. But as a general rule, overprotection should be a positive endeavor, i.e. we should overprotect strong points in our position and not weak ones. Okay, so now we'll move on to the subject of how to rid ourselves of weak pawns. More specifically, the issue of deciding which pawns need to have their weakness cured and which do not. It often comes down to the same situation. There's a pawn complex that would be sound, but it has one weak member. This weakness can be either immediately obvious, or it has the potential to emerge after some pawn movement by either you or your opponent. So we can have a look at one example of each. For the first, we have this position, which was reached by Nimzowitsch with white against Jacobsen in Copenhagen in 1923. The weak pawn is on h4, and this is emphasized after rook c5, attacking a bishop. So bishop d7, it's the best move. If a bishop d3 check, king c1, and now rook d7 to defend the pawn. Rook c8 check, king g7, rook b8, and white's winning this pawn instead. So bishop d7, now rook takes d5. So white is a pawn up. Now followed king f8, king c2, b3 check, king c3, king e7, and white is ready to bring together his pawn mass simply by playing e4. After which everything is neatly protected and the rook is no longer tied to shepherding them together, so we can go and do other things. However, the problem lays in the h4 pawn, which Nimzowitsch refers to as a stupid sheep that is running away from a shepherd and is in danger of, in a rook endgame, after something like rook a7, a1, h1, and the sheep is going to be gobbled up by the wolf. So here white plays h5 to fix that problem. So then came bishop e6, rook c5, king d6, rook c6 check, king d7, h takes g, and now knight takes e6, exploiting the fork. If king takes c6 now, then knight d8. So f takes e6 now, rook c5. And rook g5 and f4 is coming next, and it's going to be a winning rook and pawn endgame. So for an example of the second case, we can look at one of Tarash's games. So he had the white pieces here against Bartman. Black to move played rook c6. Then came rook hc1, rook hc8, g4, g6, f5, g takes f5, g takes f5, and a rook g8, which is a mistake. Black shouldn't allow f6 to be played, not in this kind of setup anyway. Better was e takes f5, knight f4, attacking d5, bishop e6, now rook g1, which is going to be hard for black to face, but easier than what he chose. Sorry, hold on. So yeah, rook g1. So yeah, rook g8 was played in the game. So now came f6 check, king f8, rook g1, rook takes g1, knight takes g1, and king g8, because black is tied now to defending h7, and his king is the only piece that can do it. And this defending this pawn is going to be a serious problem. And he could have avoided this instead of playing a rook c6 at the beginning, at this point. What he should play here instead, he has to see pretty deeply, obviously, to do it. But h5 would have been the right move now, because now he can allow f5 and f6, because it comes with the condition that the g and h pawns will be traded off. So play might continue h3 and now g6, and not h4, because knight g1 and knight f3 next is going to be annoying. So g6, now g4, and black will have a much better position than in the position we just saw, and much better chances of surviving. So of the two examples that we saw here, the first example is not too difficult to understand and executes, what Nimzowitsch did in that game against Jacobsen. But cases such as this one here in the Tarrasch game are much more problematic, and this is because they require a good understanding of the different ways a pawn mass can advance and attack, especially on one of the flanks, these pawns here. As a general rule, it does well to bear in mind sometimes it is strategically necessary to get rid of one of your own pawns, either before or during an advance of your own, as well as during an attack by your opponent, as we've seen here. And it's important to decide whether these weak pawns need to be dealt with before an attack will commence, or whether they will be dealt with during the attack itself. Okay, so that ends the chapter on overprotection. Next we'll move on to maneuvering, which is the final chapter of the book. So I hope you enjoyed this one. Please leave any comments or thoughts. Thanks very much.